These woods would have run wild if they'd been allowed to. Not far from here, the forests owned the land. Tangled trees, ground rooted up by wild boars and badgers, vegetation-choked lakes that stories said were home to wicked spirits, because what else could thrive in water so black? But the woods outside Tsarskoye Selo were the Tsar's woods, and anything belonging to the Tsar meant order, regularity, precision. It was winter now, but all year round these trees were as pristine as if a Dutch master had painted them. The only thing out of place was Alexander Nikolaevich, who knew he was as far from imperial splendor as it was possible for a man to be. Long stretches of frozen track and heavy drifts made the trek from Saint Petersburg slow-going, and because Sasha's horse was property of the imperial army, he'd been forced to leave it at the final outpost and take the last 15 miles to Tsarskoye Selo, on foot. He'd intended to trim his beard before leaving camp, but that hadn't happened either. And so he looked as bedraggled and ill-prepared as he felt with each step nearer to the Catherine Palace. What would Felix think of him when he stumbled into the grand halls of the imperial estate? Hardly a celebrated hero returning from the wars. A vagabond, rather, begging for a place to stay. The war was over. Napoleon and his Grande Armée fleeing west, pursued by a determined force of regulars who would snap at their heels all the way to Paris. But no one had told Sasha's nerves. Every sense was pricked for anything amiss. The trill of a bird, the creak of tall firs dusted with snow and ornery with cold. The wind, muffled and hollow through the worn fur of his hat. No sign of danger, not yet. But that was the trick about danger. It seldom gave a sign. The fighting at the end hadn't been like it was before, at the blood-soaked field of Borodino, the disastrous losses at Austerlitz. But it would take more than the retreat of the French emperor to convince Sasha that this was, in fact, a time of peace. A gap between the trees and the gilded roof of the Catherine Palace rose through the dusk, bright enough to make Sasha's heart shudder. Its burnished domes were like a cathedral in the wilderness, glittering against the robin's egg walls. After so long at the front, the palace seemed like a dream, some fantasy one of Felix's cooks would spin from sugar and marzipan. Another step, and it was gone, lost in the leafless tangle of branches. Beautiful, but insubstantial. It seemed impossible that such a delicate structure could exist in the same world where the roar of cannons rattled men's teeth, where the choke of gunfire blotted out the sun. He kept to the path, forcing his thoughts down a different track. A warm fire, a chance to unlace his boots, a smile from Felix, the sound of his voice, not a dream of it, but the reality, the true color of which could never be recreated, not even in the most faithful memory. He sighed at the thought, the thick cloud of his breath catching in his hat like frost. "I told you I'd come back in one piece," he'd say to Felix when they were alone. "It takes more than a war to keep me away from you." Then he stopped. Without the crunch of his footsteps, the silence was total. And yet he was certain he'd heard something. A small thump, muted, like a body falling into the snow. The idea was nonsense. Forests made noises. Snow fell from tree branches. Birds shook dead twigs loose. Badgers raked their claws along tree bark for food to bring back to their sets. He'd been moving since dawn, that was all. Sit down, get something to eat, and the world would start to look like itself again. The next sound was a soft exhale, distinctly human and not his own. Sasha looked off into the woods. The woods looked back invitingly. It wasn't late, but dusk fell early now, and soon it would be dark in earnest. And while he no longer believed the midwinter stories his mother had told around the stove when he was a child, there was still no cause to go looking for trouble. Men weren't meant to walk through woods alone, even manicured woods like these. Too many threats could lurk in the shadows. The scale-crusted Vodinoy, snatching travelers from the banks of its lake to gnaw on their bones beneath the surface. Long-haired rusalki, ghostly women luring men to their graves to avenge their own deaths. Nonsense and superstition, fairy stories to keep children indoors after dark. But nightmares didn't die as quickly as belief in them did. Still, that breath again, and this time a soft groan, a woman's voice.